This is episode number 24 with Linda Fogg-Phillips.
The school of thought out in the modern world, or in our world today, is it takes 21 days to create a habit or 60 days to create a habit. But in reality, if you've got the right pieces in the right place, you can create a habit in 5 days or less. And a lot of it does come down to the strength of the emotion that's attached to the behavior. The stronger the emotion, the faster that behavior becomes habitual.
Welcome to the Anchors of Health podcast, where it's all about helping you achieve the best health you possibly can. And I do that by bringing on world-class experts on the 4 key anchors of health, which is mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. Within each, it's all about finding what works for you. I'm your host, Bill Choi, and today's episode is under the mindset anchor, and it's all about behavior change and habit formation with Linda Fogg-Phillips, who runs the Tiny Habits Academy and does all the teaching and training using the Tiny Habits method, which was created by her younger brother, BJ Fogg, who's a behavior scientist at Stanford. This brother and sister team is like the Donny and Marie of behavior change. They have helped thousands of people, and coaches literally change their lives using this simple and effective method. And you're going to learn all about that in this episode. We really go deep on what it takes to create new habits quickly and easily. And this is not just for you. If you're a parent out there with children like I have, the principles that Linda talks about applies to them as well. So you can really help build great habits in your children. If you want the show notes and links to everything we discussed, just head over to anchorsofhealth.com/24. So let's jump right in. Here's my conversation with Linda. Linda, welcome to the Anchors of Health podcast.
Hey, thanks, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
So glad to have you on, Linda. So I'm excited that you're here today because the work that you are doing around behavior change and habit formation is literally life-changing. So I want to get into all of that. But before we do, I want to know about you first. Who is Linda Fogg? Give us a glimpse into your personal journey and how you discovered your purpose with the Tiny Habits Academy.
Oh, well, thank you, Bill. In a nutshell, my journey was discovered simply out of necessity, but as that necessity was met, my real journey surfaced and my real purpose surfaced. And my purpose that surfaced was to give people hope and evidence that they can change. As you know, I work very closely with my brother, BJ Fogg. And years ago, when I was needing to find something to help support my family, he brought me in to do some research with Stanford along the lines of online behavior. So it was mostly how kids were adapting to Facebook. This was in the early days, in like 2009. I have 8 children. So I had basically a laboratory within my home. So my real exposure to behavior and behavior change had to do with the online space, the online behavior, how we all interact and respond to social media primarily. But from there, I moved into habits simply because I found that, BJ's Tiny Habits method started to surface as being a very, very effective and successful method. And I also was in a position where I'm a big believer of habits. My background, is in health promotion and exercise physiology. I've got a master's in that. I've been a personal trainer. And I know how important it is to help people create the lifestyles that they want and the changes that they want through habits, not just by telling them what to do, but helping them discover how to actually implement new habits and behaviors into their lives. Now, really the most transformative part of my journey was 8 years ago, my 20-year-old son, who was a personal trainer, passed away, and it was very tragic and sudden. We weren't expecting that.
Oh, wow. Sorry to hear that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was just devastating to my family, and it still is a difficult situation. I don't know that it'll ever get easy, but that sort of put us in a weird funk, or at least me in a weird funk. I was pretty much apathetic and somewhat depressed simply because I wasn't able to really process his death very well, or in a very healthy manner at that point in time. And a year after that, I had a severe horse accident. We lived on a 5-acre horse ranch at that time. And I had a horse come up and over on top of me, a great big 1,700-pound horse. And it should have killed me. Fortunately, it didn't, but it did knock me out. It did break all my ribs. I was life-flighted to the trauma hospital. And what I remember the very next day, like I was unconscious for quite some time, but the next day when I regained consciousness, the very first thought that came into my head was this exact phrase. It was, "Your life has just been saved, and you better damn well figure out why."
Wow.
And that was my response too. It's like, wow, what am I supposed to be doing? What is my purpose? And then I
Do you think that was a message from like God? Are you a religious person, or is that something just internally you were saying yourself?
No, I'm very religious, so there is no question it was a message from God, because I should have been killed in that accident. And at that point in my life, I actually didn't have a lot of desire to live, because the son that I lost, I mean, all of my kids were all close. All my kids were amazing, but this one particular son I was especially close to. So when we lost Garrett, it really, I just really felt like that the pain was so severe. I had a difficult time just even wanting to get out of bed after that. But when I had my horse accident, I can honestly say it's one of the things that saved my life. There are a number of things that have happened since that have helped reinforce the fact that I'm here for a purpose and I'm here for a reason. So shortly after that accident, I started working more closely with BJ. And also on the tail end of that accident, about a year later, we were in the home building business here in Las Vegas. And as you know, in 2010 to 12, the home building, or basically it started in 2008, but the home building business took a huge nosedive. And we're just a small family builder, and it took us out of the game, completely out of the game. We weren't able to recover from that recession. And as a result, we lost our business, we lost our horse ranch, which was my dream, and we had to essentially start over. But in the midst of starting over, my husband wasn't functioning very well, and I just couldn't figure out why, what was going on. Took him into the doctor, and it was soon discovered that he had early onset Alzheimer's. He was only 50, well, at that time he was only 58. And then it became very evident that, what I was doing to temporarily get through, the housing crash to help my family financially was not going to be a temporary role. It was going to be a permanent role. But that's also at the same time that things started to surface that I realized I had a bigger purpose than what I thought I had. And so that's when I started working really in depth with BJ and empowering and teaching others how to change their lives through habits. And do it very simply and quickly. And it's a life-changing skill. We look at habit formation as a skill. And it's a skill that anyone can learn, and they can learn it very quickly, and they can implement it in any aspect of their life. But it can change lives. It really does give people the hope that they've lost, that they can create the lifestyle that they want, that they can design, the habits that they want to have and be successful with it. My favorite habit is another one of those that has really pulled me through some difficult times as we continue to have difficult times. My husband has declined substantially. He's in the severe stages of Alzheimer's now, and he's only 62. Actually, he just turned 63, so he's still pretty young for this illness. And there's some days where it's really a struggle, or I know we're going to have a hard day ahead of us. But the habit that BJ calls the Maui habit really pulls me through every single day of my life. I do it every morning, no matter where I'm at. And that habit is, after my feet hit the floor in the morning, I will say it's going to be a great day. And of course, I celebrate that. And as a result, what I have learned by practicing that habit, I've done it now for nearly 4 years, is it's helped change my mindset. It's helped me realize that instead of being a victim of my day or a victim of my circumstances, I can choose to be a victor no matter what I'm facing. And so just that simple, small change has made a huge difference in my life and how I approach my day. And as a result, the success that I meet during the day.
Wow, that is so powerful. First off, thank you for sharing that, and my heart goes out to you and your family. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this right now that are going through similar struggles, and you're really giving them the strength to push through. So thank you for that, Linda. Now, before we get into your specific method, because I know you've been researching behavior change for a very long time, there doesn't seem to be too many ways that people actually change behavior in the long term. So can you tell us what are the ways that people most commonly actually change behavior?
The typical way that people try to change behaviors is they rely on willpower or discipline, or they really feel like, they just need to be really highly motivated. And not that that's not true, but the problem is it's not sustainable. The motivation is not sustainable when you're trying to change behaviors like that. A good example that we've all probably had an experience with is New Year's resolutions, where at the year you think, okay, I'm going to get in shape, I'm going to run every day for 30 minutes, or I'm going to go to the gym every day. And yeah, that might last for a week or two, but your motivation starts to sag, and you start missing those daily, runs or the daily trips to the gym, and then you start feeling discouraged and feeling like you failed again. Once again, you failed at creating a healthy habit that you wanted to create, but for whatever reason, it didn't work. And the reason is that you didn't start the habit as a really tiny behavior that had that didn't rely on willpower or didn't rely on motivation, and you didn't reinforce it with a positive attitude or what we call an instant celebration, which is an attachment of a positive emotion. Instead, we think very negatively about ourselves when, and here again it goes back to mindset, which I know is one of your big areas that you touch on. But when we have a negative mindset, it defeats us. It subconsciously defeats us and sets us up for failure. When we have a positive mindset, it gives us basically the gas in the car that we need to keep the car going down that road. So the typical way people try to change behaviors or create habits is, trying to do something way too big and really relying on willpower to push them through. And that might last for a short period of time, but it doesn't last long term.
Mm-hmm. And another one I commonly see too, right? But this is very rare, is having an epiphany, right?
Oh, yes. Let's talk. Thank you for bringing that up. Let's talk about that. And like BJ often teaches, and we teach in the Tiny Habits Coach Certification course, that there's 3 ways to change behavior. The first one is an epiphany, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The second one is what we call the change of context, which is really important. And the third one is baby steps. And of course, that's where Tiny Habits falls into, is that baby steps category. An epiphany is something such as, someone has a heart attack and they go into the doctor or they're feeling ill and their doctor says, oh, you just got to start eating a healthy diet, and you've got to start working out, you've got to get more rest, a whole list of things that they need to do to improve their health. Well, at that point in time, they are motivated to make changes because they realize they may not be around to see their kids grow up or their grandkids if they don't. But what we see happen is 6 months down the road, or maybe 12 months down the road, they're back into their old habits. It's simply because they haven't really incorporated those habits internally into their daily life. They've done them because they've pushed themselves through with motivation. Now, epiphanies do work. It's just sometimes they don't create sustainable changes. And they're difficult to design for. So if you're trying to make, some changes in your life, of course, you're not going to plan for a heart attack or something like that. So you really can't design for an epiphany successfully. Second one is the change of context. This really is one of my favorite approaches to changing behavior. And it's not one that oftentimes we give a lot of attention to. A change of context is setting up your environment, whether it be your home environment, your work environment, even the people that you hang out with, your family, getting people that support you and a home environment that supports you in the changes that you're wanting to make in your life. I'll give you another example. My family, we do better when we're on an eating plan called Whole30. You're probably familiar with that.
Yes.
But so it's no dairy, no gluten, and no sugar for 30 days. That's just a good lifestyle for us. Once in a while we get off track, and that's normal. But whenever we do a reset, we're going to jump right back into really being, I don't want to say strict, because I don't see it as a strict. It's a really good eating plan for my family. But like at the beginning of the year, we go through my house, we remove anything that has gluten, sugar, or dairy in it. We just throw it away. We just get it out of our context, so it's not even there. Because if it is there, your resistance and your willpower will at some point in time be diminished, and then you just cave into those cravings or into those old patterns if you don't set up your context to be successful to help you support the habits and behaviors that you're trying to create. Another good example is drinking more water. We all know how important water is, but most of us don't drink enough water. One of my clients, she was actually one of my personal training clients, and also I was working with her in Tiny Habits. And when I started working with her, I said, okay, I want you to drink a gallon of water a day. And she looked at me like, oh, you've got to be crazy. I said, no, we're not going to start like right now, but I just want you to know where we're going, what we're shooting for, and where eventually I want you to get. It's not going to happen this week. It might not even happen this month. But eventually I do want you to get more hydrated, and that's the milestone that I want you to shoot for. And then her response is, well, I don't even like water. It's like, okay, that's all right. We can work on that too. And I remember the day so clearly, and her name's Anastasia, and I remember the day so clearly that Anastasia texted me, and she said, oh my goodness, I drank a gallon of water today. And it was about 2 months into the process of working with her, but we were able to create that as a habit by setting up her context to facilitate drinking water more frequently. And the context was things like, putting water bottles at her desk, water bottles in her car, having water wherever she went throughout her day, and also creating tiny habits that reminded her, that triggered her to drink more water. But also, in addition, since she didn't like water, we put fruit in her water, or things that were flavorful to her, that were obviously healthy, that helped, like mint leaves or whatever it took for her to start acquiring the taste for water as she developed the habit of drinking water consistently throughout the day. So that's another look of change of context.
Amazing.
And of course, yeah, well, and it was, and this happens over and over, but so often, we're trying to change habits and behaviors just solely by relying on motivation or willpower. We really overlook the fact that we need to have our environment support us. And whatever it is that we need to do, we need to design that to support us. Maybe there's friends that really aren't healthy friends. Maybe this is a good time to evaluate the kinds of friends that you have, because that's part of your environment as well. I'm not saying to get rid of your friends, but it's something to think about as to the influence that they're having on you and your health behaviors and what you're wanting them, what you're wanting to do versus what their lifestyles and habits are.
Yeah, and actually, one comes to mind for me in this context. Actually, my wife was studying for the CFA exam many years ago, and it's basically a 3-part exam where you can only take it once a year. And at that time, we had a huge TV screen with DVR and everything on that, and she would just come home after work and watch TV. So I said, you know what, we're getting rid of this TV so you can pass this exam, and she ended up passing. So that would be context, right?
Exactly. Yeah, okay. Exactly. And Bill, congratulations to you for recognizing that. Of course, we would all rather sit and watch TV. That's a temptation. That's not always bad, but in this situation where it probably would have been distracting to her and what she really needed to achieve.
Right.
Yeah, change of context. Along those same lines, you just triggered a funny thought that I had, or a memory. Like I said, I have 8 children, and we're all in some aspect or another. My youngest is 19, and my oldest is 34. But in some aspect or another, we're in the world of health and wellness. I've got a daughter that's a masseuse, another daughter that's a personal trainer, has her pro card. In some aspect, all of us are in that industry and in that world because that's how my children have been raised. That's our lifestyle. And I think it might even go back to when my kids wanted to watch TV when they were younger. We didn't have any chairs or sofa in our family room. We had stationary bicycles. I had 5 of them lined up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's like, if my kids want to watch TV, that's fine, but they needed to be on the bike. So that's a change of context where instead of telling them, no, you can't watch TV, it's like, fine, watch TV, but you're pedaling on the bike while you're doing that. So that's setting up a household environment. I don't have that now, but when they were younger, that helped reinforce the fact that they needed to be active during the day as opposed to just sedentary and sitting on the couch.
Right. Yeah, environment is critical. So number 3 there, you said, is tiny steps, right? So that's your method. So what is the format for designing a tiny habit?
A tiny habit, it's a really simple format, and we call it a recipe. We call them tiny habit recipes, and we call it a recipe by design, simply because like in any recipe that you make, you can adjust the components or the ingredients in it to your liking, to make that recipe so it works for you or it's pleasing to your family. So in a tiny habit recipe, there are 3 parts, and we call it the anatomy of a tiny habit. The first part is what we call the anchor moment. It acts as a trigger. And the way that I think about it is the anchor moment is the noun, is the thing that triggers. The trigger is the verb, it's the action. Oftentimes people use those words interchangeably, which is perfectly fine. But the anchor moment is an existing routine in your daily life that you're going to attach a new behavior to that you want to create as a habit. Now, the key here is when you're creating a new habit is making sure that it's planted in the right time of your day where you want that habit to live long term, not just short term, but like if it's, like a meditation habit. This is a perfect example. If I have a meditation habit, and when I started to create this as a habit, I struggled with it simply because I wasn't really sure what time of my day I wanted to meditate. I just had this goal to meditate every day, but that was so fuzzy and ambiguous, it didn't happen. I'd get in bed at night and it's like, I didn't meditate again today. So once I designed a specific point in time that I wanted to meditate and attach it to an existing routine, that habit fell into place. And the time that I decided that I wanted to meditate was first thing in the morning. And the anchor moment that I chose is after I brushed my teeth. So I chose a very specific point of my day of an existing routine that once I did that existing routine, it triggered me to do the next step, the tiny behavior. Now, so the second part of the anatomy of a tiny habit is the tiny behavior, obviously. Now, this is where a lot of people also struggle, is they try to make the behavior just too big, way too big. So for example, with meditation, I eventually wanted to have the habit of meditating 20 minutes a day. Now that's not tiny, that's pretty big. And meditation is actually a sort of a difficult habit to create. So instead of saying, after I brush my teeth, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes, my tiny habit, and still is today, is after I brush my teeth, I will sit in my meditation chair. I have a very specific spot that I've designated that I'm going to meditate in every morning. So the tiny habit is just that, sitting in my meditation chair. Now, for example, this morning I didn't have 20 minutes to meditate, but yet I was able to still sit in my meditation chair and celebrate. So I kept that habit alive in that time of my day. I mean, the reason I didn't have time today to meditate is I've got family in town visiting, and so my schedule has been a little bit jumbled up, a little different than normal. But that's the beauty of this. These habits are very resilient. It took me less than 3 seconds to sit in my meditation chair and say, good job, way to go, I did it. And that, even though it's not meditating for the full time, that's okay, because I'm still following through with that tiny habit. You can think of it like a seed, a little plant. I'm keeping that plant alive by giving it a little bit of water during the day, because I did it. And tomorrow, I know I'll be able to meditate for my full 20 minutes. But the tiny habit is always tiny. So you always celebrate that little tiny behavior. So whenever I meditate, I always celebrate sitting in my meditation chair. And then after that, if I want to go ahead and meditate for 20 minutes, I look at that as extra credit. Basically, overachieving, even though I know that's where I want to go. That's where I want to be. And the third part of the tiny habits method is an instant celebration. And this simply is attaching positive emotions to behaviors that you want to create as habits. BJ's been brilliant in really surfacing the concept that emotions create habits. So, and I think that's a key piece that so many of us don't realize or don't even do, because we don't know it's important. When I first started doing tiny habits, before I started teaching it through the academy or working more in depth with BJ, he had me go through the 5-day, the free 5-day program, which your listeners are welcome to go through. We don't charge anything for that. And the first time I went through it, he called me and he said, "Hi," because he lives in the Bay Area, actually Northern California, and I live in Las Vegas. And he called me and said, "Hey, Linda, how'd your habits go this week? How'd your tiny habits work out?" I said, I thought they went really well. He said, "Well, so how did your celebrations go?" Well, there was dead silence on my side of the phone because I did not celebrate. I didn't think it was important. I thought it was sort of weird. And he picked up on that right away. And he said, "You didn't celebrate, did you?" I said, "No, I didn't celebrate." He goes, "Okay, you got to do it over. And this time you really need to celebrate. It's really critically important." And through my practice of tiny habits, and also through coaching literally tens of thousands of people and training other professionals in working with their clients in creating habits through our Tiny Habits Academy, I really have learned and seen the positive impact and importance that emotions have on habits, on attaching positive emotions to habits that we want to repeat. So those are the three components. And to just review, there's the anchor moment that acts as the trigger. There's the tiny behavior, and a rule of thumb of what's tiny enough is a behavior that takes 30 seconds or less to complete. And then the instant celebration. So that's really simple, really basic, but it really is effective and it's life-changing.
Absolutely brilliant. I love this. I absolutely love this. So simple and powerful. So I want to dig in a little deeper on these three components. So let's go back to the anchor. Why do you recommend that people do something after an anchor versus before an anchor?
Oh, I love this question. Well, if you think about it, an anchor, like I mentioned before, an anchor acts as a trigger. It tells you to do the next step. Now, if you use like before I go to bed, I want to read a book. Before I go to bed, I want to read a chapter. The problem is there's not a trigger there. That space and time, there's nothing that triggers that behavior. So basically, you're trying to rely on your memory or your will. Just remember that before you get in bed, you read a book. Whereas if you sort of switch that a little bit, and that's the time of day that you want to read, but the anchor moment, you can change that a little bit to be, after I sit on the edge of my bed, I will open up my book. So it's the same behavior, it's the same habit that you're creating, only you are framing it a little bit differently so that the anchor moment triggers. So the new behavior comes after you sit on your bed as opposed to before. because the before doesn't trigger anything. When you get in bed, if you haven't read your book, you've missed that time slot that you wanted to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, I love that you actually even thought of that. The little minutia in that is just brilliant. When it comes to finding the best anchor for the new tiny habit you want, what should we be aware of when selecting that anchor? I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but like, what makes a great anchor, and do some work better than others?
Yes, there are anchors that do work better than others. Morning anchors tend to be more reliable, and it's for a very simple reason. Our morning routines are more set than the routines later in our day. So, and also, we're less apt to get sidetracked with our morning routines than opposed to later in the day when other people's demands come in and we don't have as much control over, our daily routines later in the day as we do in the morning. So if you can create a habit and you'd like it to be in the morning, that's going to be, that's a better time frame as you're trying to create a new habit to think about. Also, as far as anchors, and this is what I see quite a bit with the people that I coach, is sometimes the anchors are pretty ambiguous. And as you learn more and more about the Tiny Habits method and about BJ's work and about the work that we do at the Academy, you'll learn that we really push you to be very specific about your anchor moment, specific about your tiny behavior, and also, specific about how, what celebrations work for you and make you feel positive. So when I say being specific about an anchor, oftentimes I'll have people design tiny habit recipes that might say, they might write, after breakfast, I'll go for a walk, something like that. Whereas after breakfast is not specific enough. I mean, it's very ambiguous. So what I tend to guide my clients to do is say, okay, tell me about your breakfast routine. What do you do during breakfast, and what's the very last part of when your breakfast is over? Well, for example, I had a client, and actually she wanted to walk for 30 minutes a day, but she wanted to do it after dinner. And her name is Rebecca. And I said, okay, Rebecca, tell me about your dinner time routine. And so as she walked me through that routine, everything from clearing the table to rinsing the plates to putting them in the dishwasher to wiping off the counters, putting soap in the dishwasher, closing the dishwasher and putting start. That was her dinner time routine, or her after dinner routine. And so we designed her tiny habit to be after I started the dishwasher. So that was her anchor moment. It was very specific. So every time she started the dishwasher, she knew exactly what she was supposed to do, what the next step was. Which for her, the tiny habit recipe that we designed was that she would put on her walking shoes. Really tiny behavior. So she'd push the start button on the dishwasher, she'd put on her walking shoes, and she'd celebrate that. Now, you're probably going, but wait, she's not walking. Well, what tends to happen is that little tiny behavior, when you celebrate it and you feel like you're moving forward and you feel good about it, you're going to go out and walk anyway. You're already in that forward motion to do that bigger behavior. And if you don't, that's okay, because you're still planting that tiny seed in that time of the day that you eventually want to expand and grow that habit to be a 30-minute walking habit, which did work for her. The other way I could have approached it with her was just say, after you start the dishwasher, I want you to walk out your front door and celebrate. However, if she didn't have on her walking shoes, she might have gotten sidetracked, to go get her walking shoes on before she walked out to the front door. So for her, it actually worked better just to put on her walking shoes and celebrate. She did start eventually, actually pretty quickly within 10 days, walking for 30 minutes most every single day after dinner. Wow,
amazing. So it probably helps to pick an anchor that could probably go with you wherever you go, right? Because we have some people that travel a lot for work or whatever. So an example with that would be like the first thing I do when I wake up, or after I take a shower, or after I use the restroom, right? Those would be, you would consider solid anchors.
Yes, exactly. In fact, we have a name for those. We call them super anchors, simply because they are anchors that no matter where you're at, they're going to occur. You could be on vacation or you could be on a work trip. And typically when you're looking at what is a possible super anchor, it typically is bodily functions or things that, like getting dressed, sleep, waking up, getting out of bed, using the restroom, showering, like you said, showering, combing your hair, eating breakfast, brushing your teeth. Those types of things are really solid anchors because they're very reliable. They go with you no matter where you go. So yeah, good point.
Fantastic. Now, some questions revolving around the picking that new tiny behavior. You advise picking actually 3 habits. So why not just one?
Oh, you've got the best questions, Bill, and I love this. There is a reason why we say 3. Here again, it comes back to, and this will surprise you, but Tiny Habits really is about mindset. It's also about restoring confidence or rebuilding confidence in yourself that you can create the habits and behaviors that you want in your life. Now, if you're only working on one habit, and for whatever reason that you're struggling with that habit, then you're going to have a negative opinion of yourself. It's going to drag you down. If you have 3 habits, what we see typically happens is out of those 3 habits, one of them typically works pretty well. Another one you might struggle with, which actually we like, and I know that sounds weird. We don't see anything in Tiny Habits as a failure. If something's not working the way that you want it to, it means that you need to revise it. You might need to change the anchor moment. Or maybe that behavior needs to be changed a little bit. So it's a matter of sort of, like any other recipe, trial and error to see what really works best for you and what fits into the lifestyle that you have. I mean, even today, when I design Tiny Habit recipes, and BJ's no different, on paper it looks great, but when you go to start practicing that recipe, you start to find out that maybe that behavior belongs in a different time of your day. Or maybe there's a better anchor for that specific behavior to trigger it. So it's a very fluid process, and it's also a very playful process. And the celebration also brings that playfulness into that habit formation method. So, hopefully that answered your question as far as that goes.
Yeah, no, that did. Now, when it comes to picking that new tiny behavior, how important is wanting to do that new behavior versus thinking you should be doing that new behavior?
It's hugely important.
Or maybe is it just important, like maybe in the beginning, and then once you get the hang of it, then you can kind of be a little bit more, daring with what you're trying to change?
Well, what we do, and we don't really focus so much on this in the free 5-day program because that's just a really good sampling, and we have so many people that are effective and successful just going through our 5-day program, which they can do over and over and over again. But with our coaches, we go into in-depth training, and that's one of the topics that we do touch on with the in-depth training around the Tiny Habits method, is have your clients start with behaviors that they want to create in their lives as habits. Start with the wants. Do not start with the shoulds. And the reason we do that is, here again, we look at habit formation as a skill. And as a skill, we want people to experience the success momentum around creating that skill very quickly and rapidly around behaviors that they want to do. So you're not bringing motivation at all into, not relying on motivation. You are bringing it into the picture as far as it needs to be something that somebody wants to do. But you don't need to amp up the motivation to have that behavior happen. Now, once someone does learn the Tiny Habits method and starts developing that skill, then if you need to, you can bring in the shoulds. And what happens typically, I've worked with a lot of diabetes patients who, obviously there are some really important behaviors they need to have in their life for health reasons, and sometimes they know that they're shoulds, but they may not be wants. I typically will start them off with just simple behaviors that maybe aren't even related to diabetes management as habits. And once they gain confidence in themselves that they can create habits, what happens miraculously is the shoulds bubble up to be wants, because now they have a belief in themselves. They have an ability that's been increased to create new habits, and they know that the method works. So that's why we start off with people with wants, and then we move to shoulds. Very similar with weight loss groups. I work with a lot of weight loss clients. And here again, and this might surprise you, we don't start off with weight loss habits when I start working with them. And the reason why is because there's a lot of emotional baggage sometimes attached to weight loss. And so many people have tried to lose weight and have failed time and time again. And they have a lot of negative thoughts and a lot of doubts about their abilities in that respect. So we start with habits. In fact, the habits I typically start my, not just weight loss clients, but any client with, if they want to do this, and most people do, is the Maui habit. After my feet hit the floor in the morning, I'll say it's going to be a great day. I also bookend that with a gratitude habit at night, which is after my head hits the pillow at night, I will think of one thing that I'm grateful for. So here again, we're working on, helping them have a positive outlook on their lives. And then the third habit, I typically will let them choose something that falls in between. Is either the flossing one tooth habit or the 2 push-ups habit, something like that. That is very simple, but we know those recipes are well designed, just to help them learn the skill and help them start creating what we call success momentum that restores that belief in themselves so that they can create new habits. Then in about week 2 or 3, then we start moving into like the weight loss habits or the other habits that might be a little more tricky, but by then people have, they've learned the skill, they have a belief in themselves, and they've experienced the success momentum. They know they can be successful with this method. So that's usually That really is an important step to help people restore their confidence.
And you did mention that the tiny habits should take less than 30 seconds, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you don't want them actually doing something where they have to time themselves for that 30 seconds, right?
Yeah, we're not a fan of timing, but we know, of course, 30 seconds is a good measurement, but you can do anything and say, oh, is this going to take 30 seconds or less to do? So that's just sort of a good measuring stick. But yet, no, we don't want people timing on their watches, because then they're focused on the time and not on the behavior. So absolutely right.
Right, brilliant. Now, let's talk about the celebration principle, because I think this is very important. You're using an emotion, like you said, rather than a reward, because you often hear people talk about rewarding yourself after you accomplish a goal. Like, if I go to the gym every day this week, I'll reward myself with ice cream or whatever. So what is the significance of the celebration being tied to an emotion rather than a reward that makes it so effective?
Yeah, it's huge. And this is a common misnomer in the world of habit formation. Rewards do not create habits. Rewards, just like you said, are delayed gratification. There's something that's earned later. It's emotions that create habits. And the instant positive feeling, the instant attachment of emotion is really what's critical in creating the habit. And some people will say, well, what do you mean by, emotions create habits, or an instant celebration? What do you mean? It can be something as simple as even just closing your eyes and thinking in your head, good job, I did it, or way to go, or I'm moving forward. Some positive phrase like that reinforces the fact that you're making progress. Or it could be an all-out cheer. In public, of course, that's probably not what you want to do. But, some type of behavior that helps you feel good, helps release those endorphins and that dopamine to attach to that behavior so that you want to repeat that behavior over and over again. Let me use a really recent good example about this. I love dogs. Also, obviously, I love children. And we just adopted another rescue dog. We've had a couple. I just adopted a rescue dog last Friday with the intent of training him to be a service dog for my husband. And I've got quite a bit of experience of training horses and dogs. And this is a young puppy. I think we don't know for sure, but we think he's between 18 and 12 months. We know he's no older than 18 months. But the sad thing is the people that had him before me, when they turned him over to the rescue, they just said, oh, he's just too much work and our family just can't handle him. I've had no problem with him at all whatsoever since I've had him since Friday, and what is it, almost a week now. And it really comes down to animals learn very similar to how humans learn. I give him, the anchor moment. I give him, for him it's called a cue. For us, we don't use the term cue in Tiny Habits method. But I'm basically implementing the Tiny Habits method with him. We named him Buddy. And when I tell him something that I want him to do, and I show him the behavior that I want him to do, and then I don't reward him with a treat. I pet him on the head and say, good job, way to go. Or very positive with my emotions towards him, and he knows he's done a good job. He's learned these behaviors almost very, very quickly, almost like by the second or third time I ask him to do something, he already knows what I want him to do. Simply because I've given him that very specific anchor moment. I've triggered him to do behavior. He knows what that behavior is, and it's very small. And I've rewarded him with an emotion. I've made him feel good about what he just did. Things as simple as he now knows where my house is. And that's one of the things I want to train him to do, is to bring my husband back home if he wanders away or takes him on a walk. He also knows when I say it's time to go to bed, he knows exactly where to go. When I say it's bedtime, buddy, let's go to bed. There's the anchor moment. It's bedtime. He knows exactly where he's supposed to go. And, I praise him when he does that. We're no different. We just need that same positive reinforcement in our lives. Those of us that have children know that when we positively reinforce our children's behavior, then they tend to want to do that more and more, do that again and again, because they're feeling good about their progress. So a celebration can be even just a simple emotion or memory, thinking back, like on my phone, I have a picture of my adorable granddaughter. And it makes me feel good. It makes me feel happy when I see that picture come up. So oftentimes when I'm creating a new habit, part of my celebration is just to push the home button on my phone so her picture comes up. And that is one way of celebrating or making me feel good about that behavior. So celebration can be anything. I've worked a lot with people in cultures where it's not their culture to celebrate, or it's unacceptable socially to celebrate. So even something as simple as nodding your head or closing your eyes and thinking a positive thought, that is a sufficient celebration if it makes you feel good about what you're doing.
Oh, fantastic. Those are great examples. Yeah, because that was going to be my question, right? Like, how authentic or real does that celebration have to be for that person? And it's very just individualized, right?
It is. It is. And we all have natural celebrations. The best way to find what your natural celebration might be is to observe yourself when you're watching a sporting event. When you're pulling for your team that, wins, how do you respond to that? Or when you're watching your child perform maybe at an event or something, how do you feel after they've successfully performed? Those are ways to start noticing how you naturally celebrate. And then using those types of celebrations for your tiny habit recipes is very effective and very successful.
And Linda, how long does it take to create a new habit?
This is another one of those myths that I love debunking. Of course, the school of thought out in the modern world, or in our world today, is it takes 21 days to create a habit or 60 days to create a habit. But in reality, if you've got the right pieces in the right place, you can create a habit in 5 days or less. And a lot of it does come down to the strength of the emotion that's attached to the behavior. The stronger the emotion, the faster that behavior becomes habitual. So you can create a habit very, very quickly.
So in the beginning of this interview, when you were talking about, the epiphany, the context, and tiny steps, which is what you're talking about right now, do you kind of layer the context and the tiny steps together to make it more effective?
Yes, I do. And especially with my clients, and this is also what I train our coaches to do, that we go through our, Tiny Habits Academy, is we do guide them through helping your client get set up for, I call it set up for success. Paying attention to what their context is and their environment so that when that anchor moment occurs, that they can actually carry out with that tiny behavior. And it might be something as simple as, like with my, Anastasia, my one client, is putting bottles of water wherever she was. And actually her anchor moment with that tiny habit recipe was after I complete a call, basically hang up from a phone call, I will take a sip of water. So, it was like, let's look at all the places that she might be when she's on the phone. And of course she walked sometimes because she had a cell phone. So we'd put water, in her bathroom, by her nightstand. Not that she was on the phone in the bathroom, but, in the car, in the kitchen, in her office, so that whenever she hung up from a phone call, that was her trigger. That was, her anchor moment to take a sip of water, and then she'd celebrate. Yeah, so I do think it's hugely important to take a look at your context, your environment, and how can you get that set up to help you carry out your tiny habit recipe. I mean, for example, if somebody were wanting to, let's see, in fact, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, somebody wants to read a book. Reading is a great habit to have. It's a habit that many of us want to develop. It's one of my favorite habits. But maybe somebody has a tiny habit of, or after I get home from work, I will read a book. Well, the problem with that is the anchor moment's not really specific. So I would push that client to say, okay, when after you get home, and identify where do you want to sit down and read your book. And they might say, well, I want to sit down in my easy chair in my family room. Okay, great. So maybe the tiny habit would be, after I get home from work and put down my work bag, I will sit in my easy chair. Of course, the intent is to read a book. And most often, if the book is right there close to that easy chair, they will go ahead and pick up that book. Or they could create the habit of, after I sit in my easy chair, I'll open up my book. But creating that context so that book is right there by that anchor moment or right there by that easy chair is hugely important. Otherwise, you're going to have to go looking for the book, or you'll forget about that behavior because you're not set up. You'll get distracted or sidetracked from doing that.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. That's a critical point. That's fantastic. Can you talk about the mindset that people should have going into creating changes that are a bit more challenging, like nutrition, stress, and physical activity? Because a lot of people may be super motivated listening to this right now, but when they get back into their normal routine with so many things working against them, it can be tough to get things going. So what should people be aware of or expect realistically with this?
Great question, because what we find, and I'm going to go down a little bit different path and then come back for a minute, Bill. But what we find with the Tiny Habits method is it helps people change their identity, basically meaning how they think about themselves or how they view themselves, because they're finally being successful as opposed to all that negative self-talk of thinking, oh, I can't do this either, or I failed at that. So Tiny Habits really is helping people create that positive mindset and help them change their identity to really feel like they can achieve something. In fact, every week after people go through the 5-day program, we send out a survey. And a couple of weeks ago, one of my favorite responses that came back, it's an open-ended question that we have in our survey. There's about 8 questions in our survey. But one of the questions is an open-ended question that says, I now see myself as someone who, and we let people fill in the blank. Well, this one participant responded, and she said, I now see myself as someone who has superpowers. She said, that's how I see tiny habits, as a superpower to change to create the life I want. I thought, wow, isn't that so true? It's a great tool that is a superpower that lets you achieve and create things that you haven't been able to do in the past because you've approached them in a way that hasn't been successful. So as far as a mindset of going, so now I'm going to come back to your original question, a mindset of going, how should you approach maybe the bigger habits or the harder habits or the things that really might rely on more willpower, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do, but just be aware that can be, you can be setting yourself up for failure if you're only relying on willpower, is go into it with a playful attitude. Like I mentioned earlier, Tiny Habits really is about having fun and a playful, lighthearted approach to creating habits. And don't expect perfection. None of us are perfect. The other thing that I think is really important as you're creating other any habits, whether they're smaller habits, simple habits, or habits, bigger habits that are a little more difficult to really create at some point in time, is don't track your habits. I know that sounds weird, but don't check the box, don't track your habits. The reason why we say that is the first time that you miss doing your tiny habit, which there'll be times that things will change or you'll be in a different environment and your habits won't, your anchor won't occur, so your habit won't occur. That's okay. But for most of us, if we check the box, as we do habits, the very first day that we miss, even though maybe we've done it for 10 days in a row, we're going to look at ourselves as a failure. Or we're going to look at ourselves, that didn't happen. And we're going to be negative on ourselves. So as far as creating the bigger habits or the more difficult habits, like, changing your dietary habits, do it with a playful approach and realize that it's a process. This is why we use the plant analogy with the tiny habits, is you've got to plant that little tiny seed and you've got to put it in the right place during your day or in your garden, wherever you're going to plant that, and realize that you need to nurture that, celebrate that, and just trust the process that it will take root and grow to be a big tree if that's really what you want it to be. But just, don't get down on yourself about not growing it faster or, not doing it, quote unquote, the right way. Just realize that this is a learning process. This is a journey of discovery. And as long as you're continuing to move forward or continuing to determine, what's the right anchor moment, what's the right tiny behavior, or, playing around with your celebrations, you're making movement forward. You're progressing. That's how we look at it.
And Linda, I love how you brought that up because I actually asked Brian St. Pierre from Precision Nutrition, what is the number one thing that separates successful clients that he has from those that are not so successful? And he says exactly what you just said. It's not getting down when they have setbacks or when they kind of trip and fall off of something. They get right back on the bike and they don't let that hang them up. So that's amazing that I can see now the most successful people doing this and teaching this understand that point.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yeah, so something we haven't talked about yet when it comes to behavior change is accountability. How important is accountability? And would you consider that like another layer to add on top of this in order to bulletproof these new habits?
Yes, I think accountability is really important, but I look at it from a different perspective than most people look at it. I look at accountability, like, for example, being accountable to a coach. I think coaches are hugely important in people's lives. I have 2 coaches myself. One of them is a storytelling coach. Another one's a business building coach. I think, even if you look at CEOs or athletes, they all have coaches. Even the best in the world have coaches. And in my opinion, coaches are great people to be accountable to, not necessarily a spouse or a friend, because a spouse or a friend sometimes knows you too well. And that sometimes can bring friction into a relationship if they're trying to hold you accountable. But the way that I see a coach is most effective is not necessarily calling you out when you don't do it, but being there to guide you, to cheer you on, so that somebody's in your corner. If you run into stumbling blocks or you have questions, that you can go back to your coach or the individual that you're using, as your accountability partner, even to just say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Do you have any ideas or insights? But I do think it's important to be accountable to someone besides yourself, simply because I think that they're really critical in helping you see where you're progressing, sometimes when you don't see that yourself. I don't use accountability partners or coaches to tell me what I'm not doing right, but I use them to tell me where I'm making movement forward and where I'm succeeding, and helping me build on my successes as opposed to magnify my failures.
I love it, Linda. All this stuff is so fascinating, and I want to be respectful of your time because I could talk about this all day. Just as a final wrap-up question, do you have any last words of wisdom or anything you would like to leave our audience with?
Oh, wow. I think my last words of wisdom are to believe in yourselves and realize that anything is possible. Seek out the methods and the tools that are going to work for you, but also really celebrate your little wins, your tiny successes, and realize that that's really what's going to give you that momentum and that strength to get through the bigger hurdles that you're going to have in life, because we all have them. We all have those challenges. But if you have a foundation of really recognizing where you're successful, even something as simple as making your bed in the morning, celebrate that. Those little wins during our day, then that will help you overcome the bigger pitfalls that we all come across and give us the strength and the ability to pick ourselves back up and start all over and continuing to put one foot in front of another. That's what I've had to learn for the last few years, is really the habit of resilience. And that's really what I'm about, is helping people create the habit of resilience, the habit of knowing that whatever they have their heart set on, that they can achieve that, even if the storms come and the pitfalls come. As long as they continue to get up and put one foot in front of the other, they will be successful. I
love it, Linda. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
They can go to tinyhabitsacademy.org. We'd love, or even tinyhabits.com. I run the academy. I do all the training and teaching using the Tiny Habits method. And, you can reach me through there, and even my cell phone's on there. I welcome you to call me. My email address is on there. You can shoot me an email and reach out. Even if you have any questions about habit formation, I want to be accessible. Like, this goes back to, Bill, one of the very first questions. My purpose, and I've found this, well, I don't want to say the hard way, because it was really a blessing in disguise. My purpose is to help other people have hope and evidence that they can create the lives that they want and that they can have change. If I can do it, anybody else can do it as well. So I wholeheartedly invite people to reach out to me if they even have questions about habits, or what their next step is. And of course, if anybody wants to go through our training, our Tiny Habits Academy, you can find our training schedule there as well. And we love having people go through that advanced training that are in the industry or have any desire whatsoever to help others create a happier, healthier life as well.
Great stuff. Again, the website is tinyhabitsacademy.org. Go check it out. And Linda, I actually went through the 5-day Tiny Habits program myself, and I was blown away by it. It was just amazing. So I highly recommend people go and check that out. Linda, it was a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
There it is. I hope you got a lot out of that interview, and if you did, please share this with someone you care about. We just want this message to get out there because I know this will really help people. Go check out their website, tinyhabitsacademy.org. Do the free 5-day Tiny Habits program. It's a game changer. And if you're a coach, they also have a certification program so you can help your clients make lasting changes in their lives. Everything we talked about with links will be in the show notes as usual, so just go to anchorsofhealth.com/24. That's it for me, and I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.